Welcome. I'm Mary Long. I'm the founder of Her Story Network, and I'm going to take my glasses off so the light doesn't reflect. I'm very happy today to welcome Reverend Angie Buchanan, who is the founder and spiritual director of Earth Traditions. Welcome, Angie.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here.
I'm so happy. I've been looking so forward to our talk. I don't know you well, but I've heard and read a few things that you have said and written, and am very much intrigued and interested in what you have to say. Now, I went on the website, which is earthtraditions.org, which I highly recommend. Go to that website if for nothing else, but read, do you call it a manifesto, Angie, on that opening page? What would you call what you believe?
I think it's our mission statement more than anything. It's a charge to the public to define who we are and what we stand for, and to invite those that are of similar beliefs to jump in and be with us.
Well, I think it's absolutely beautiful. And as I spent most of my life as a very devout Catholic, well into my adult years, and then in my mid-30s through something kind of spun out of that, and have been seeking other ways outside of traditional religion. Traditional religion certainly does not fit for me anymore. And what I found interesting is you would describe your church, it's a pagan church, correct? It says,
yes.
Okay.
Yes, we are pagan.
So I'm not 100% certain all Christians were taught this, but I certainly know as Catholics, we were taught that paganism was the devil's work. I'm finding more and more anything that empowered us as people was something the Catholic Church made us afraid of, because we're easier to control when we're afraid. These are things that I'm kind of learning as I go along. And so the more I learn about paganism, the more I feel, wow, just like with anything with the divine feminine has, been labeled as evil and bad, so has paganism. And I actually am feeling like paganism is actually a really beautiful, I don't know if it's a practice or religion. I don't know how you would classify it, but could you please just tell us more? How would you describe paganism?
Sure, I'm happy to. First of all, I think it's important for us to remember that the history is always written by the victors. And so generally the enemy, or the ones that are being fought against, are vilified. And this has repeated itself over and over again, even into today, with regard to any sort of war or attempt to take over an existing culture. Paganism, if we bring it down to its roots, it is the practice of the pre-Christian traditions of the people of Europe. It's a European word. The definition of it is people of the earth, or people of the hillside, or it referred to those who had not joined the cosmopolitan Roman society that was happening in the big cities. These were the folks that were considered to be backward or uneducated or not hip. And I think the interesting part about this is that the way these people operated was they followed the agricultural cycles. So in essence, they were growing the food that the cities were eating. And the way that they did this was to follow the natural cycles of planting the seed, growing the crop, harvesting the crop, storing the crop, going into fallow time. And it's the natural cycles of the earth. The earth that we live on has a natural rhythm. It births itself, it grows itself, it harvests itself, it dies. And we see this in most of the natural cycles. So the rising and setting of the sun, the phasing of the moon, the changing of the seasons are all cycles that we can come to rely on. And those cycles are mirrored within the human existence. And so it's a microcosm, it's a macrocosm, it's a cycle that repeats itself over and over again. With humans, it's we breathe in, we live, we exhale, we die. As long as we continue to complete that sacred cycle, we get to stay human. And when we stop doing that, we are no longer human. So we mirror what's happening with the earth. It lives and dies, it recreates itself. And it has a way of communicating and feeding us. So there are many different branches of paganism. There are many things that come under the pagan umbrella. Some specialize in a more ritualistic program. Others are very solitary. Some work with deity, gods, goddesses. Some see those individuals as archetypes. For myself, I tend toward animism, which means a sacred reverence for the life energy that flows through everything that's on this planet. So I think that's pretty much a synopsis of what I can give you for now.
And correct me if I'm wrong, from what I understand about paganism, it seems to be much more intertwined with the divine feminine spirit as opposed to a warrior masculine type of God. Is that correct or not correct?
It has its place, Mary. It's the idea that, first of all, vocabulary and language are insufficient to express some ideas. And so we use a common language and a common variation of language in order to be understood across our cultures and to be able to communicate. So with paganism, there is an equality between the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And that shows up in myth and lore throughout the millennia. And there, in paganism, there is a sometimes more focus on the divine feminine because she has been so oppressed and erased throughout our history. And the idea that we can even have a society that does not equalize and value the divine feminine within our spiritual practices, I think it offers an explanation for why we are in as much trouble as we're in our world today. The fact is that the goddess gives birth to the god and gives birth to everything. And there is no man, no king, no tyrant, no anyone that has ever come to this plane of existence other than through the body of a woman. So we have managed to allow our society to use fear of that power to attempt to erase the divine feminine. And paganism has always embraced the idea that there is a mother goddess and a divine feminine, and a need for us to find the balance between the two in our world.
I've always found it interesting that the one time in the stories we're told about Christianity and our beginnings, the first time that this God decided to create human beings, he had a man give birth to a woman. But then for the rest of the time, the rest of eternity, it's all women giving birth to man. But in the beginning, it was Adam first and then Eve. It's just, when you actually start dissecting what we're taught, which is what happened to me when I went through the spiritual transition in my 30s. It doesn't make sense. A lot of it just doesn't make sense, and it contradicts each other and things like that. So, when you speak about the divine feminine, you're speaking my language. I can feel it. I sense it. I certainly could not explain it. I do know it's missing. I think deep inside all of us were longing for her because she's been buried so long. And I'm wondering, paganism, there is an aspect of paganism that does practice witchcraft. Is that correct?
Yes, it's not just paganism, though, Mary, and this may come as a surprise to a lot of people. Again, I repeat the idea that language fails us. Witchcraft is a practice. Paganism is a religion. So in my observation of the world, witchcraft is a practice that is employed by every religion, even Christianity. So the idea of witchcraft is that you You take an idea, you take something that is important to you that you want to focus on, and you petition something outside of yourself to bend the will in order to achieve a goal that benefits you. That's witchcraft. So the example that I can give you is the high school basketball team gathers around the goalpost before their game, and they pray. And they pray that they're either going to win the game, or sometimes they try to like cushion it by saying we want to play our best game. The omission here, what they're not saying, is that they want the other team to lose. And so this is the petitioning of something outside of themselves to bend the will in their favor. That's witchcraft.
It's really interesting you say that. I was just having a conversation with someone last night about prayer. And I said, isn't prayer kind of like playing the lottery? Like we hope, like we don't say a prayer and know this is going to happen. It's more like, please, please let this happen. I hope this all works out. So prayer, that's my traditional belief of prayer as a Christian. And so, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but with witchcraft, it feels a bit more empowering, which I think is how true prayer is supposed to be, a thanking of for whatever this outcome of the greatest good is that you want. So would you say that it's just a difference in wording, or how would you define the two?
Well, I think I absolutely would say it's a difference in wording. Some people call it spell casting, some people call it witchcraft, some people call it prayer. And I think the difference between witchcraft and Christian prayer is that there is a subjugation, there is a prostrating that happens where Christians will tend to fling themselves on the floor of their body temple and beg for somebody else to come in and do something with this. So witchcraft is more about empowering yourself I apologize for the dog.
You don't never have to apologize for your dog.
Witchcraft is the petition that is made of the energy that we are creating around ourselves to perhaps become more aware of opportunities as they open so that we can see them, to perhaps increase our intellectual knowledge so that we can find the path to what it is that our heart desires. And it doesn't necessarily involve service or exchange or anything that has to do with bowing a knee to something else. So yeah, it's I don't know why he's doing this. He never does this.
He's very interested in what we're saying. As I've gone along and on my spiritual path these past 20 years or so, I have it seems to me that anything that had to do with divine feminine or female empowerment was labeled as devil and bad. Certainly in my training in the Catholic Church, that's what I was raised as. And I do kind of feel like witches have gotten a bad rap, evil witches. And the training's been very good. I mean, we all are very afraid of witches. And, the more I learn about paganism and witchcraft and Christianity and all these things, it seems to me that they've done a very good job of making us afraid of our own female power.
I would agree with that. And I think, first of all, where do I even want to start to unpack this piece? Women have been vilified throughout history, and it's the fear that comes along with the power that women have to give birth. There is historically in Christianity the need to suppress and oppress women so that men can step forward and sort of lead the show. I think that it needs to be pointed out that during the Inquisition and during the witch trials that happened in Europe and even in the United States, that the majority of those women, if not all of them, were Christians. And they were accused of witchcraft as this being the most difficult evil that could possibly be perpetrated upon humanity. But I always say, when something like this happens, you need to follow the money. And what was happening was there were these wars where men were attempting to take over and lead countries and conquer. And they were using religion as a tool to do that, because many men were dying in these wars. They were leaving their property and their farms and their wealth to their wives and children, which was giving women quite a bit of power. So what happened was that the church during the Inquisition came in and started making these accusations. And if a woman was accused of witchcraft, even if she wasn't even convicted yet, her property was confiscated and it went into the coffers of the church. So this is how the church has built its wealth over thousands of years, is through the blood of innocent women. And there were times where there were small towns in Germany during this occurrence where there were almost no women left. And finally, somebody woke up and said, well, if we're going to continue to have a human species on Earth, we have to have these women. And so they were permitted to live, but they were severely, severely restricted and tortured. And if they spoke up too much, some of them had their tongues cut out, and they were just used as, especially, sperm receptacles to bear children. And we're seeing that come back around again today.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you say that, because as you're talking, I'm seeing how we're seeing a resurgence of that. My personal belief, it's kind of the patriarchy's last stand, and they are bringing out all the guns, everything they can to hold on to the power. When you talk about women and the money, I know in the Catholic Church, priests were allowed to be married in the very beginning, but what happened was when the priests would die, the women would inherit the land, and the church was losing too much land. So that's when I say, when you start unpacking why we believe the things we do and where these traditions started, most of them end up at power and money. That's really the beginning stage, power and money. How do you have power over people? You keep them afraid. You keep them struggling. You tell them that it's holy to be broke and struggling and you'll be rewarded in heaven. And the people telling you that have built their own cities and run their own banks and walk around in gold clothing. I mean, it's when you really look at it, but it is very difficult. I know when I first started walking away from my traditional religious beliefs, I was very scared. This was my whole foundation. And I tend to be, I know this is a big failing of mine. I tend to be too dismissive because I forget how much people cling to this. And I want to respect that, especially in these times. People need something. But as you were talking about this, this is something that I struggle with. I'm going to try and say it clearly, because I've heard and read a few things you've said that I thought were so powerful and needed to be spoken about. Because there is, I have a very hard time not understanding, because I do kind of understand it, but here's where we're at as women. And I think women need to admit and own and look at the fact that we have been very well trained to submit, to play small, to not make waves. We're very, even, we have all these sayings and songs, and that's all great. But when push comes to shove, we still very much, Gloria Steinem said it best. We are the only group of people who are willing participants in our own discrimination, because we've been taught that's what God wants. That's holy, right? We want to be holy. We want to be good people. And there's a God in the sky that wants us serving men. So we do that. We had a man 7-8 years ago, whatever, 2015, 2016, in the election, a man stood up and said, I sexually assault women, laughed about it. The person he said it to laughed about it. It's recorded. He said it. This isn't hearsay. We've all heard him say it. And from my understanding, I'm not a political whiz or anything, but when they brought the numbers down, it was middle-aged white women who pretty much voted in the millions to get him in. This is how well conditioned we are to believe we deserve abuse and suffering, is that someone can say, I sexually assault women just like you, and we can say, I don't care. And one of the things I love about paganism and the work that you're doing is you're I think rebirthing the power of the divine feminine and the healing. Would that be accurate, or am I putting words in your mouth?
I think the words that I would choose is that we are unveiling it. It's always been here. We've known for our whole lives that the earth cycles itself, and its cycles mirror the cycles of woman. So consciously, subconsciously, we've always known that the goddess, in her myriad of aspects and facets, has been present. And the Christian indoctrination, actually, it's the indoctrination of all of the Abrahamic religions, is to try to continue to obscure that. They may give lip service to some things, but the fact of the matter is that they're terrified. The men of these religions are terrified of women because they're afraid that women will make them unnecessary or obsolete. And that's, I can see where frightened men who have been indoctrinated with this for hundreds and hundreds of years, it gets in your cell memory. It continues to impact you, even when you think you've overcome it, but it is the basis of everything that you've been infused with since the moment that you were born in these religions. And even those people that weren't born into those religions, they also have to live within the society that's been created around them because of those religions. And what paganism is doing is just, I think, pulling back the curtain and saying, the emperor has no clothes. So with regard to your politicians, this is also an indoctrination where men have been indoctrinated to believe that they're entitled, that women are there to serve them, that women are there to carry their children and dust their homes and do all of these things. We are seeing some shifts with gender role in society, and I think those are good. We're not there yet. And these places that would impose this upon us are very, very well funded. So it's, again, it's the one that has the most dollars wins in most cases.
Right. I read something that you said that really impacted me, because I am, I hate to say, I hate to but I'm on a spiritual path. Let's just say that. And I'm always reading, seeking, trying to figure out what fits for me, what doesn't. And I listen to a lot of spiritual podcasts and read a lot of spiritual books. And I do understand about starting from the result that you want and don't give energy to the negative. But where I'm having a hard time finding a place to fit is in the spiritual, the newer spiritual, not the traditional religious, that say, yes, I mean, obviously humanity's going through a huge shift. I mean, you'd have to be deaf, dumb, and blind to not see something major is happening here. And it's like, but let's not talk about that. Let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the result we want. And I feel, I think I've mentioned this once before, maybe on a different show, but I was raised in a house with alcoholism, very violent alcoholism. And crazy things be happening. I mean, all this stuff, violence, craziness, they have to run out of the house, stay at a hotel for the night, go to school the next day, in my little Catholic school uniform and my books, and like nothing ever happened. And you don't talk about it. You don't say anything. You just go to school. And now I'm just a normal 10-year-old girl or whatever. And I feel kind of like that's what we're doing. And maybe that's just me. Maybe that's my trigger because of how I was raised. But I feel like, hold on, are we not going to talk about all this crazy stuff that's happening, especially as it affects women? Because I really think the emergence of the divine feminine is the only thing, or reemergence is the only thing that's going to heal this, because it's been out of balance for so long. And if we just skip the part where women really, our whole everything has been programmed to keep us so small and quiet and controllable, that if we don't talk about how we got this way in the first place and how to heal it, I just feel like it's more inauthenticity. Let's just pretend we're all frolicking through the field. Does that make sense? What are your feelings about that?
Well, I think that there's something to be said for balance. No, it's not all white light and fluffy bunnies, and no, it's not all, the writhing darkness, pit of fire. So I think it's up to us to find that middle ground and to be able to define what our circle of influence is around that. The whole embracing of the chronically positive that's been happening for a couple of decades now, with things like, what was the name of that book that came out?
The Secret?
Yeah, that was it. So that's spiritual bypassing. And it is the frantic desire to not allow anything in that is going to upset us or trigger us or make us think about bad things. And if we don't do that, then whatever it is our heart's desire is, we're going to attract that. We're going to attract that into our lives. No, my response to that mentality sometimes is to throw up that National Geographic photograph of the young Black child huddled over, starving, and a vulture just waiting, because I guess that child didn't want to eat badly enough. So it's absurd. It's absurd. And, I think one of the things that I say to folks about this whole positivity movement and beauty movement, and everything is wonderful and everything is lovely, and if it's not that way for you, then we're going to victim blame and tell you that you're wrong. So, and then we have the religions that are in their such gentle, sweet ways saying, rise above it, transcend. And I have a real problem with that, because, we are human beings. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. There is something inside of us that animates us toward life. Bring me back to animism. And the idea is that whenever whatever it is that animates us leaves, we cease to be human. So while we are here, we're supposed to be having the human experience, not transcending it. There's nothing wrong with taking a break and going to a retreat and getting into a calm space and surrounding yourself with beauty, or even in your own mind or out in nature or wherever it is that brings you peace to your heart. There's nothing wrong with going to those places through meditation, through prayer, or however it is that you get there, as long as we remember that that's not the place to stay. There's work to do here, and not all of it is pretty.
First of all, if you were here, I would kiss you on both cheeks right now because I love what you said. I feel like something inside of me is unclenching because even in all my years as a practicing Catholic, I was trying so hard to be and do and say, I remember, like, I am a rock and roll queen. I love rock, been to all the concerts, but during the time when I was really enmeshed, all I listened to was like spiritual hymns or Christmas music in the middle of July, because this is how I'm supposed to be. So any natural human instincts or wants or whatever were always suppressed, certainly any negative feelings. And what I have found in my own life, because, you know, I grew up in a pretty abusive household, but a lot of love too. I don't want to, anyway, that's not why we're here. But the only way to get to the other side, I have found, is releasing all that. And the only way to release it is to feel it. And if I'm being told the way out of this mess is to skip over and just focus on happiness, I feel like all that pain, it's still all suppressed inside of there. And it's not really healed. It's more fakeness. And I'm so sick of fakeness. The inauthenticity. Oh, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
I get it.
Inauthentic. There we go. Inauthentic. I don't want that anymore. I want to know what's really true, at least for me. And so I'm I don't want to act like I'm the president of your fan club, though I probably could be. And I know so little about you, but I just
I had a fan club.
I love women who are unafraid to not just be who they are, but be as powerful as they are. I think that's what we need. My personal opinion, I don't know if you hear this from women all the time, is, oh God, I'd rather work for a man than a woman. Women are such bitches. I hate working for them. They're so mean. And I feel, so I was born in the 60s, so it was kind of coming of age through the 70s and stuff, right after the women's lib movement. And I think women did not know how to hold power. We didn't have examples. So we looked at men and just kind of imitated them. And I think, yeah, we got a real patriarchal, misogynistic view of power. And my greatest wish now is that we relearn not only how to be powerful feminine beings, but spiritual feminine beings outside of the confines of the patriarchy. And I think you are a beautiful example of that. And I guess this is what I'd like to ask you. I don't know if you can answer it, but let's just pretend that you have just been elected. You've been elected to straighten this stuff out. What's going on? If you were given 3 things, Angie, what's the 3 things that you would say need to be addressed spiritually, as a woman, in whatever realm? In your wisdom, what would you say as human beings, what we really need to look at and address in order to move forward?
Wow. Okay, so I'm the queen of the universe and I'm here to fix things. Okay. So that's a tough question because at this point I can only speak to what I might do here in our Western society. I believe that we need to find equality and partnership. I don't think that we can do that so long as we are allowing monotheistic patriarchal religions to govern us. We live in a country where we are supposed to be not establishing religion in our governments, and yet we are. And some of the most important decisions that are being made today are based on Christian principles. And that needs to stop. Hard stop, period, at the end of the sentence. It is absolutely unacceptable that people who do not embrace a spirituality or or a religion that denies people the right to love who they want to love, that denies women body autonomy, that denies people the autonomy for their deaths, that does not pay their women at the same amount of money that they pay their men, when in fact, the majority of women are raising their children alone, and the men have just been permitted to escape scot-free. And I think that I think that is, there's something fundamentally wrong with that. I think there is something fundamentally wrong with women not being honored or perceived as valued with their in spiritual leadership, in religious leadership. And I think that the religions of the world know this. They fundamentally know this. And I don't know if you're familiar with Sister Joan Chittister. She is a Catholic nun who has almost been excommunicated on a number of different occasions. And I had the privilege of meeting her several years ago at one of the Parliament of the World's Religions. And one of the things that almost got Sister Joan thrown out was a commercial that she had put on, and it was a camera that was panning like 100 different babies, and they were all just beautiful, healthy, pink-cheeked, plump little babies, and they only were in diapers. They had a diaper on. And as the camera panned over these infants of every culture and every color, the voiceover said, "We look at every one of these babies, and there's sadly one thing wrong with all of them." And there's a pause, and then she says, "They're female." And that's pretty much the way the world looks at women, is that they are something to be laughed at, dismissed. They're there for your entertainment. They're there to have your children, to establish your testosterone levels in the world. And sadly, women, that's the ground zero that women have had to fight from. And we really made some progress in the 60s. And I was just growing up then too, but I remember a lot of what happened with regard to the refusal to design ourselves for the pleasure of men, and the way advertising started to change a little bit, and women started to be more empowered in their workforce. However, they had to become men, or the masculine presentation, personality presentation of men. And we look at women like Hillary Clinton and even Sarah Palin, from both sides of the political stratosphere, and they are both presenting in a masculine world in ways that, some of them are just hard line, no as a sentence, and others are, shooting wolves from a helicopter. So, I mean, this is and that's not to say that there is anything wrong with the warrior archetype. There are goddess warrior archetypes. There are goddesses of death. And there's just such an array, a beautiful array of personality and characteristic in the divine feminine, that we don't need to be the divine masculine, and we don't need to emulate that, and we don't need to, the quote that says, "When God is a man, then men become gods." That's stark truth, and that's what's happened. And it again, it needs to be rolled back. So there was another point that I was going to make, and I think I may have lost it, but I think to sum that part of it up, we need both. We need both. And we have religions out there that claim that they embrace that, but they don't. There are restrictions still on it. And we don't talk about women. We don't talk about the fact that in our Western culture today, in our society, men maybe get their hands in blood a couple times a year if they're deer hunters or something like that. Women have their hands in blood every month and in childbirth. And the idea that that somehow this makes women inferior is absurd. We need both. And so that, I think, is where we're trying to head to. But we keep getting set back by, as you said, it's a paradigm that's dying, and people are leaving these organized religions in droves, thankfully. And there are lots of Christians out there that are redefining who they are and what they believe, that are not subscribing to this. There are not enough of them, but they're there. And the other piece is that a lot of people are returning to their roots. And so, you know, we saw a lot of appropriation happening in spirituality, where white people were coming in and just helping themselves to indigenous traditions and sacred ceremonies and trying to emulate them and trying to make money off of them. And, you know, the fact is that white people also have a very rich spiritual history. And if you're severed from your roots, then you can't grow. And so we need to find those roots and come back to them and learn what our own history was spiritually before it was usurped by those who wanted money and power and put men in place to take it.
That was all so beautifully said. But we're coming up to our closing time. But before we do, I just want to make sure we make this clear, because we always have to. We don't hate men. And I think that's another way they shut us up. A lot of these men who have microphones, have shows or whatever, anytime women step forward en masse or unite, well, we're feminazis, we're men haters, we're lesbians, we're whatever. They always degrade and call us names. After the man who admitted to being a sexual predator was elected president of the United States, and women said, no way. And all over the entire world took to the streets to unite and have our voices heard. And we were turned into a joke. They talked about our pussy hats instead of what he had said and done. Then it was just a big joke. And it kind of really just fizzled out. We started and we let all that backlash. But this is why I think it's so important that we stay together and we talk about these things. And I'm so grateful for you and your willingness to use your voice, because it is going to be scary. We're going to get pushback. They're not going to say, oh, ladies, you want a seat at the table? Here, let me get you a chair. It's not going to happen that way. I hope it doesn't have to be too, I don't know what word I'm looking for. I hope there's not too much pushback, but there will be. But I think the more we heal what's inside of us and release this training that we're lesser than and need to be sweet little girls, I think the more willing we will be to connect with each other, and the easier it will be to push through these doors that have been labeled, you know, this is as far as you go, ladies.
I think there's also a piece of it that's about self-responsibility, and women are going to have to face the fact that many have been complicit in our own oppression. So the idea that we get to blame it all on men. I have a wonderful, amazing husband. I have an amazing son. You know, there are men in my life, and
same here.
And they are not subscribing to this. And so we can't just point our fingers at men. We can't even point our fingers at religion. What we have to do is change the paradigm of it, allow men to have a more nurturing feminine side, and stop the religions from legislating us to suit their own paradigm, and to insist that we conform to their religion. Religion is a very personal thing, and you have to stop using fear to recruit, because who isn't going to try to get along and integrate with that if the opposite is either being thrown in jail or thrown in hell for eternity? I mean, it is a horrible, abusive paradigm. And it has not been possible for people to look behind the curtain of that, because that's not who's writing the books and that's not who's preaching from the pulpit. And there's a comfort that comes from the social aspect of being involved in a religion and a feeling of safety. And yet the churches are not stepping up for that. We have churches like Joe Osteen, who, shut his church down when his community needed him the most. Millions and millions of dollars that he's worth and bringing in all the time. And he can't help people that are in need. So we're seeing less of that helping going on, more of the hoarding going on. It's become corporate. It's become a business. Religion has become a business. The Vatican is no different. They are built on the rubble of pagan temples. They are filled with stolen artifacts.
Yeah.
There's no admission to that.
Yeah, boy. Yes, well, you said a lot there. That's a lot to think about. I appreciate so much your being here, sharing your wisdom and your spirit with us. And Angie, you're so accomplished. And I said, you're the founder and spiritual director of Earth Traditions. But as we close, if you just want to say a little bit more about who you are and how can people get in touch with you or find out more about you?
Sure. Earth Traditions is a pagan church. We're at www.earthtraditions.org. And we do hold some events throughout the year. Some of them are private to the membership, others are open to the public. I won't go into what those events are. You can probably see it on the website because that's a whole nother talk show. But the idea is that we follow the seasons, the cycles of nature. We are open to everyone and anyone. And we are a pagan church, and there is a difference between religion and spirituality. I want to make sure I make that point here. I hear people all the time say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. Well, friend, the First Amendment doesn't protect spirituality, it protects religion. And we need to be aware of that when we're voting, and we need to be aware of that when we're identifying, so that we can protect ourselves and our beloveds. And that's kind of what happened with Christianity, was everybody became Christian because, the government didn't protect the ones that weren't. I also am a what they call a death midwife. And I could go into the whole difference between midwife and doula, but what I would say is don't use the word doula. And if you'd like to know more about that, look under my frequently asked questions on my website of www.deathmidwife.org. And you can find out a little bit about the training that I do of learning how to be with people as they're committing their final rite of passage, taking the mask off of death, and actually acknowledging its existence rather than continuing to live in a death-denying culture, which is what we do. We have a severe death-denying culture. And interestingly, to tie that in, Irving Yalom, who is a psychiatrist trained at Stanford University and pretty well known in the psychiatric field, says that death anxiety is the mother of all religions.
Wow. And I do know about your work as a death midwife, and I hope you will come back one day and talk to us about that, because that's another thing that we don't want to talk about, but I think we greatly need to talk about.
I would love to do that. So thank you for the invite today. And
thanks so much for being with us, Angie. All right. You take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.